I was supposed to get home on Friday night, around 8. Dan Wilkins and I went to Boston to present our company's products to several large buyers. We were doing well, or so it seemed. It will take several weeks before we receive a final response from our customers. On Friday morning at 8 a.m., we were notified that our meeting today was canceled and postponed for at least a week. Since we had nothing to do in Beantown, we headed back. I had some chores to do around the house, reminding me of which Karen pecked all my brains out, so I was glad to be home early to do them. I arrived with Dan, and he dropped me off at my house around 14:00. I went, changed into my work clothes, and took my tools. A few years ago, we added another bedroom and a main bathroom to our house. This allowed us to settle our 2 children each in a separate room. They weren't at home now, but when they were younger, things were really bad. We tried to save some money by placing the extension on the basement, about a meter high, and not on a full-fledged foundation. I gathered everything I needed and went down under the bedroom. A meter is a sufficient height, but it's still difficult to move around. I crawled to the pipes leading to the main bathroom with my keys. I noticed that the rat poison I left under the bathroom floor was mostly untouched. A year ago, I had problems with red squirrels. I never told Karen, but I bought a shotgun and once spent most of the weekend in the basement. I was under the bathtub trying to remove a rusty drain. It clogged up to such an extent that the water slowly filled the tub when we took a shower, and no amount of cleaner could fix the situation. I was going to take the bull by the horns, remove the pipe, and either clean it or replace it. I found that it was necessary to peel the skin off several joints first before any serious plumbing installation work could be done. I had just completed the initial task when my curses were interrupted by footsteps. It was too early for Karen to come home, but there was no reason for anyone else to be in my bedroom. I saw her taking a shower when I took off the drain pipe, and I was covered by a small flood. I crawled back to the hatch to warn her not to use the bathwater. Crawling to the hatch, I heard a man's voice. That was really weird, and I had a bad feeling about it. I slowly stood up in the hatch. The upper half of my body was in the closet. I almost completely closed the toilet door, so they didn't see me. Karen was undressing quite casually. At least I thought maybe it was an accident, considering that Carton Herzog was standing by our bed. I realized that I had to hurry. Otherwise, my faithful wife would no longer have this status. "I like dating you, Karen," Carson grinned, pulling off his shirt and unbuttoning his pants. Then I realized that I was too late to prevent this despicable act. It seemed to be a common occurrence. Karen was naked and laughing as she climbed onto the bed. I like to think of myself as a reasonable person, but my anger was growing rapidly. I blushed and my knees started to shake. It always happens when I'm really worried. I went down to the basement and crawled to the external exit panel. I walked around the house and saw Carson's SUV parked in the driveway. Karen must have come with him because her car wasn't in the garage or in the driveway. I grabbed a hammer and a cordless drill and knelt by the rear wheel. The drill was already installed, so I drilled a hole in the tire. It hissed for a second, then burst. It took a few seconds to lower all 4 wheels. Just in case, I also drilled a spare tire on the back door. Then I went around the car and smashed every headlight and window in that car, and I started to feel a little better. My neighbor hides the key on his porch, and I have permission to enter his house if I deem it necessary. I went to him and dialed Carson's number. I knew him because he and his wife were our good friends. Karen worked with Carson, and we were close. Apparently, I never realized how close. I took a towel from the rack by the sink and covered the phone speaker with it. When Dottie answered, I told her that I was a neighbor who saw some guy wrecking her husband's car at Tim Stewart's house. Then he hung up, walked around his house again, and crawled back into the basement with a hammer and a drill. I didn't want to leave the machine's weapons of mass destruction where they could be found and possibly point the finger at me. Now I understand that the logic was not traced here. Who will be the first suspect? An angry, offended husband. The car was smashed in my driveway. I crawled to the ledge where I kept my shotgun and pulled it out of the sealed plastic bag I used to keep it clean and dry. Our phone rang several times, but I knew Karen was too busy to answer it. The answering machine recorded something, but I couldn't make out the message left. It must have been Dottie, though. Her next step will be to drive a few blocks to our house. When I crawled up to the hatch, I heard groans and grunts in all sorts of ways. I stood up in the closet and looked around through the opening in the toilet door. Somehow, I knew I was going to hit the target when I raised the shotgun. The shot hit his leg with a distinctly audible sound. He screamed and rushed forward reflexively, I think. Karin's head slammed into the headboard with force. It must have hurt. However, this pain paled in comparison to the pain Carson felt. When I was closing the door in the opening, I saw him jumping, screaming, and squeezing his leg. I quickly put the gun back in its place, crawled out, replaced the panel, and walked through the backyard. I kept walking until I came out on the next street and walked a few blocks to the local pub. I felt like I had earned a few bottles of beer. Well, how many guys in the world can shoot so accurately? Sipping a cold Yingling, I imagined the chaos that was happening a few blocks away from the hotel. It was about 5 when my cell phone rang. It was Dottie. "This is Dottie. Where are you, Tim?" "What is it?" she asked. "We're going through Connecticut on 84, I lied. "Why do you ask?" "I'm at Wilson Hospital. Carson's in surgery and Karen's in the emergency room," Dottie replied. "What are you talking about?" I blurted out. I was really surprised. "Were they in a car accident?" "No. It's more complicated. I really can't tell you much over the phone. They just want to watch Karen for a few hours to make sure she doesn't go into a coma or something. She has a concussion. I just wanted you to know where she is, so you don't panic when you get home." "Thanks, Dottie. I don't usually panic when Karen isn't home. I appreciate you calling me. I'll stop at the house to get a car, and I'll go to the hospital. You'll see Carson's car in the driveway. It's all smashed up and the wheels are flat. But I think you can get around it," Dottie said. "Good. It sounds bad, though," I told her. "I'll take Karen's car if I have to." "Her car isn't there, Tim. It's a long story, and I don't want to tell it over the phone. It's just a warning, and I'll talk to you when you get there." I hung up and thought about the situation. I was very upset because I didn't expect them to be admitted to the hospital. I wondered if the chickens would come home to babysit with me. At nightfall, I returned home. Cars were stopping near my house, and several people were wandering around. They were all puzzling over the mess in my driveway. I left the sidewalk, walked through the courtyards, and entered the house through the back door. I went into the bedroom to change. It seemed there was a riot. The lamp and the table were overturned. Clothes were scattered. There was some blood on the carpet. I grinned, remembering how he danced around the room, clutching his leg and shouting. He was lucky I didn't have a 38 there. When a man decides to make a cuckold out of another man, he better be ready to pay the bills. I arrived at the hospital around 20:30 and went to the emergency department. Vultures. They greeted my arrival with great pleasure and relief. I spent another 15 minutes filling out forms and confirming insurance. Finally, I was brought to Karen. I was surprised at how pale she looked. She gave me a weak smile, then looked down at her hands, fidgeting with her fingers. "Are you okay, Karen?" I asked. "Are you in a lot of pain?" "I have a headache, Tim, but the doctors are being careful. They want to make sure there's no brain bleed or anything like that. I'm feeling better," Karen replied. "Did you by any chance bring me some clothes?" "What is it?" she asked. "No, Karen, I didn't bring anything. Can't you just put on what you were wearing when you came here?" I asked rather cruelly. "Where are your clothes?" I wasn't wearing any clothes. I must have fallen and hit my head in the shower. The last thing I remember, I was getting ready to take a bath. Then they loaded me into an ambulance. And I wasn't wearing any clothes, she screamed. It was very awkward. I bet it is, I agreed. What happened to Carson's car? Why is she standing in our driveway? And where is yours? Why is our bedroom all trashed? What happened to Carson? I can't remember anything, Tim. Please don't ask me any more questions, Karen pleaded. I have a headache and I feel sick. And me. And me too, I agreed when my irritation with her became almost obvious. Why don't you just get some rest? I'll be waiting to take you home when the doctors say you can leave. With that, I turned around and went to look for Dottie. I found her in the intensive care unit. When I approached her, she smiled grimly at me. He's feeling a lot better, Tim. He didn't really hit his leg, but his accessories. Now he is resting comfortably. They said that if he survived the night without further complications, he would be transferred to a regular ward in the morning, Dottie whispered. Jesus, I blurted out. How did it happen? We haven't been able to get any reasonable explanation from Carson or Karen, Dottie replied. I got a call from someone who said he was your neighbor and that someone had crashed Carson's car in the driveway. I tried to call Karen, but there was no answer, so I left a quick message and drove to your house. When I got there, Carson was in his car. A passing motorist stopped and tried to help. He told me that Carson was running around the car naked and screaming. Then he jumped into the car and said he was going to go to the hospital. The guy took the keys from him. He was very apologetic, but said he was afraid Carson was under something. He knew Carson wouldn't be able to drive with flat tires, Dottie continued. I think he might have cut himself on the glass on the seat. Blood was flowing from several places on her back and buttocks, Dottie said. We called an ambulance on the mobile. Then I heard the guy who stopped to help Carson swear. I looked up and saw Karen staggering naked down the driveway. What happened? I asked. Did Karen say anything? Nothing that makes sense, Tim, Karen replied. She was holding her head and moaning. I made her sit down. And I felt a big bump on her head. I've been with Carson most of the time since we got here. Have you talked to Karen? I told her that Karen couldn't remember much. We went for coffee and talked a little more while we waited for the news. Carson said that he and Karen went to a sushi bar for lunch, and he thinks they must have been given bad seafood, or someone added some substance to them, Dottie said. I've eaten a few dishes that I didn't like, but I've never lost my memory or accessories from it, Dottie, I said. Did he say that his car crashed and Karen hit her head because of sushi or something? I also think it sounds kind of crazy. No pun intended, Dottie smiled weakly. It's almost plausible just because I can't think of a better explanation. Their behavior was quite strange. Maybe Carson crashed his car while in some kind of trance, or something like that. It may well be, I agreed. I began to worry about my involvement in some serious matter. If Carson takes the blame, it will help me avoid any legal consequences. I acted in a rage, and I won't regret it, especially if I get away with it. Be sure to report it to the police if they ask, I advised. I don't think there is a law against crashing your own car. We talked for about an hour. Then, around 10, I was notified that they wanted to leave Karen for observation all night. I said goodnight to Dottie and left. I felt sorry for her. She didn't deserve to be in the situation she was in, but neither did I. Well, maybe a little. I couldn't sleep, so I finished repairing the drain and put away the tools. I took a drill, a shotgun, and a hammer and threw them into the Delaware River, like a bandit from a novel for 10 cents. I didn't hear any questions from the cops. but I did everything as I heard it. Then I cleaned up our bedroom and changed the bedding on the bed. Finally, I made the bed in the spare room and went to sleep there. I was still asleep when the phone rang at 9 a.m. "Tim, I can go home," she told me. "Will you pick me up? Bring me some clothes, please?" I brought her home and helped her into the bedroom. She was still walking badly. He dressed me in pajamas and put me to bed. She slept most of the day. Dottie called around noon and said Carson would be fine. He'll be discharged in a couple of days. I thought about it and realized that I didn't care if he recovered or bought a ranch. He was a total asshole. After I hung up, Karen called me. "How's Carson? What happened to him?" she asked. "No one seems to know what happened, Karen," I replied. "Carson is going to recover, but from now on, he will not be able to get a full set of one device." I was watching her to see how this news would affect her. She just closed her eyes and sobbed a little. Then I fell asleep. Later that evening, I made soup and fed it to Karen. Her color got a lot better and she talked a lot more, but that wasn't the point. In fact, she never said anything. Nothing was said about how she and Carson had screwed up so badly. "Are you going to bed soon, Tim?" He smiled. "I miss you." "No, I'm going to watch TV," I told her. "Get some sleep. You'll feel better tomorrow." I turned off the light, went to the spare bedroom, and fell asleep. When I woke up, the sun had risen and Karen was standing next my bed. She seemed to be on the mend pretty well already. "Why did you sleep here, Tim? What is it?" she asked. "I think I'll sleep here for a few nights, Karen." "You need to regain your strength and memory," I replied. "I don't want to bore you." Karen looked at me sadly and left the room. I didn't even have the courage to look at her or talk to her. I think she felt it somehow. As it turned out, the cops came to the conclusion that Carson had gone crazy and crashed his own car. He didn't try to make them believe otherwise. I decided that he realized that he would expose himself if he tried to object, and the affair with Karen would become obvious. He felt that it would be less painful to let people think that he had a breakdown or that he ate some bad sushi. Karen had no desire to visit the sick Carson and try to cheer him up. So I stopped at his house about a day after he returned there from the hospital. He was in bed, and Dottie took me to him. "Hi, Carson," I grinned. "You need to hurry up and come to your senses so I can play golf with you." He looked at me for a long time. I knew he was trying to read my face to see if I was involved in the hell he went through. I just stared at him without even blinking. "Of course, Tim," he finally said. "As you wish." It was obvious that he had lost his swagger and confidence. I realized that losing a pencil makes a man nervous. He becomes more cautious and reasonable. Karen didn't come to work until Tuesday. I dropped her off because her car was still there. She didn't try to explain to me at all how it happened when she was at home, and she must have noticed that I didn't ask again after that first night in the hospital. I was trying to decide if I had overreacted then, and if I should try to fix the situation with Karen. I put a lot of time and effort into it. I thought we had a good marriage, right up until the day Carson slept with her in our bed. Mistakes happen, and many marriages have fallen on hard times. The next day after work, we were sitting at the kitchen table. I was looking through my mail when I saw a letter from the hospital. In short, it said that Karen has gonorrhea, and I should go to a doctor and get examined, and she should start treatment immediately. I read it twice and handed the letter to Karen. I realized that I shouldn't be surprised. Over the years, Carson has made statements about his tastes for women and his addiction to them. I thought at the time that it was just talk. Now I realized that he was telling the truth. He was a real asshole. Meanwhile, Karen digested the information from the letter. I could almost read her mind. Was there a chance that I picked up the disease and passed it on to her? Or at least that I betrayed her and didn't know I infected her? If I was infected, she could blame me for giving her the infection. The joker in this deck was that I was never even close to betrayal. And if he got infected, it was from a loving, faithful wife. Well, it looks like you brought home more from one trip than you planned. She chuckled. No wonder you slept in the spare bedroom. After this brazen application, my decision was made. She wanted me to get infected so she could play this game. It didn't seem to occur to her that I might have been faithful to her. We all tend to attribute our character traits and logic to others. If we steal, we believe that others steal. It's the same with betrayal. On Saturday morning, I threw my negative test on the kitchen table in front of Karen. When she read the report, her hand was shaking. Then I tossed her another paper. It said I had filed for divorce. For the first time in a long time, Karen showed some normal emotions, begging me to reconsider my decision. She told me that she was a victim of Carson's seductive charm. But she loves me, only me. My cell phone rang and I answered. Karen stopped yelling while I was talking. Tim. The other day, I received a report from the hospital about why Tim lost the device and about other things. I have tested positive for gonorrhea. You too. What is it? She asked. And Karen's? I thought for a moment and decided Dottie had a right to know. No, Dottie, I don't. But Karen does. What an incredible coincidence, isn't it? I asked, answering her question. Yes. Incredible, Tim, Dottie said. I'm already being treated and decided to end something. I'm divorcing this traitor. By the way, Tim, do you happen to have a shotgun? I need to pack my things, Dottie. Good luck to you, I said, hanging up.